Welcome to Hard-Hitting News 365. Let's get into it.
Here is the uncomfortable question. Is America still in control of its own foreign policy? Not is America powerful. It clearly is. Not does America have allies. Of course it does. The real question is this. When Washington sends billions in military aid, blocks international pressure, risks war in the Middle East, and punishes politicians who step out of line, is that strategy? Or is that capture? Because at some point, a superpower has to ask itself a brutal question. Are we protecting our national interest? Or are we protecting a foreign policy system that no longer answers to ordinary Americans? And no, this is not about pretending there is one secret group controlling everything. That is lazy. The truth is more serious and more dangerous. America's foreign policy is shaped by presidents, Congress, donors, defense contractors, media pressure, lobby groups, ideology, and fear. Fear of looking weak, fear of losing donors, fear of being called anti-American, fear of being called anti-Semitic, fear of crossing the wrong line in Washington. And the result is a foreign policy machine that often moves faster than public consent. The clearest example right now is America's relationship with Israel. For decades, U.S. support for Israel has been treated almost like a permanent feature of Washington politics. Military aid, diplomatic protection, bipartisan speeches, standing ovations. And when anyone questions the scale or conditions of that support, the debate often becomes emotional very quickly. One side says, Israel is America's democratic ally in a dangerous region. The other side says, America is enabling occupation, civilian suffering, and regional instability. But both arguments miss something important. The real issue is not whether Israel should exist. The real issue is not whether America should have allies. The real issue is whether American foreign policy is being debated honestly or protected from debate. Because if a policy is truly in America's national interest, it should survive scrutiny. It should survive questions. It should survive criticism. If it cannot survive those things, then maybe it is not policy anymore. Maybe it is doctrine. And doctrine is dangerous because people stop asking who benefits. Since October 2023, the United States has provided massive military and diplomatic support to Israel. That includes military aid, missile defense support, arms transfers, diplomatic backing, and political protection at international forums. Supporters argue this is necessary because Israel faces real security threats from Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, and other hostile actors. That part cannot simply be dismissed. Israel does face real threats. But critics ask another question. If American weapons are being used in a war that has killed huge numbers of civilians, displaced families, and damaged America's reputation globally, where is the line? Where does alliance end and automatic backing begin? That is where the argument becomes serious. Because America is not just giving advice from the sidelines. America is funding, arming, shielding, and sometimes politically absorbing the consequences. And when America absorbs the consequences, American voters have a right to ask, who made this decision? The president, Congress, the lobbyists, the donors, the voters? Or did the system decide before the public even got a say? This is why the recent arguments around AIPAC, Israel, Iran, and American power matter. When Tucker Carlson questions politicians about AIPAC, the right hears something unusual. A conservative challenging the foreign policy consensus. When progressives criticize U.S. aid to Israel, the left hears a human rights argument. When establishment politicians defend the alliance, they frame it as security, democracy, and shared values. But the question underneath all of it is bigger than left versus right. Can America still choose a foreign policy based on evidence, restraint, and national interest? Or has Washington built a machine where certain positions are politically mandatory? Watch this first clip carefully. Do not just listen for who sounds confident. Listen for who actually answers the question.
Never taken money from the Israel lobby, have you? Taking money from the Israel...
From AIPAC.
So AIPAC raises a lot of money for me.
AIPAC is lobbying for a foreign government. And it's not.
No.
It's lobbying for the United States.
It wants America and Israel to be closely allied.
It's lobbying on behalf of the interests of another country.
So that's not true at all. And if you...
Not true.
No.
How much contact do you think AIPAC leaders have for the government of Israel?
No idea. AIPAC are Americans. They're not Israelis.
Hold on. There are tons of Americans who lobby on behalf of foreign governments. I know them. I'm related to some of them. I know how it works. I'm from here. My only question is, why don't we admit that is what's happening? You're denying it, but it's true. Why aren't they registered as a foreign lobby? You're saying that they don't coordinate with the Israeli government.
Of course, I coordinate. Do they talk with them? I don't know what they do. But
why don't you care?
This is the pressure point. The question is not whether AIPAC is allowed to lobby. Of course it is. Lobbying is legal in America. The question is whether voters understand how much influence foreign policy lobbying has over elections, candidate selection, party discipline, and public debate. And this is where both sides become selective. Many Democrats are happy to condemn corporate money until the donor network supports their foreign policy. Many Republicans attack globalism until the foreign policy establishment tells them the next war is necessary. So the honest question is not, should lobbying exist? The honest question is, when does lobbying become political capture? And when politicians cannot answer basic questions without dodging, the public is right to be suspicious. Now watch how this argument changes when the debate moves from lobbying to moral justification.
Do you feel comfortable, Bill? We've talked about this war a lot. Do you feel comfortable about a full assault on Rafah if 1.5 million people remain in that vicinity, including majority women and children? Because it would obviously be, in that instance, devastating in terms of civilian casualties and would pour even more pressure on Israel and lose them even more support. I mean, do you think this is the right strategy?
Well, I think that Israel is pretty united in its belief that it is, and Israel, I think, is best positioned to adjudicate its own interests when it comes to things like you're talking about, whether it's international support or the future of the Gaza Strip. My understanding is from all of the public discussions that have been happening that there's significant discussion about how to try to move civilians out of the way. One of the big problems has been that Egypt won't open the gate, even temporarily, to allow enough civilians outside of Rafah so that Israel can perform operations inside of Rafah. Apparently, there are 4 Hamas battalions that are currently located inside of Rafah. I'm sure that if the United States or the international community could offer Israel some sort of Harry Potter spell to disappear all of the Hamas terrorists inside Rafah, I'm sure Israel would take it. The last thing Israel wants to do is maximize civilian casualties. What's been perfectly obvious is that Hamas has precisely the opposite view. They would love to maximize civilian casualties because the increasing civilian death toll, as you pointed out, has been the single factor that's been leading to increased pressure on Israel to leave Hamas alone.
Israel's strategy is how they perceive actual victory. Yes, you can take out the 30 to 35,000 Hamas terrorists. Yeah, maybe they can do that. And maybe in the process of that, they kill tens of thousands more civilians and have to deal with the contention that will cause worldwide. And maybe Israelis don't care about that part as long as they get rid of Hamas. So let's get to an end game where Hamas has gone. Why does leveling Gaza and killing so many civilians, why would that give anyone in Israel any kind of comfort that would kill off the ideology that fueled Hamas, that it wouldn't actually just lead to an increase in that ideology, more hatred towards Israelis, more hatred towards Jewish people? I've never quite understood what the end game looks like here for Israel that makes Israel more secure.
Well, I mean, the end game presumably is security, not a sort of dynamic ideological scoring among a population that right now overwhelmingly supports the October 7th attacks, and prior to October 7th, overwhelmingly supported terror attacks against the state of Israel and overwhelmingly supported the destruction of the state of Israel. The sort of idea that more conciliation from Israel was bringing about peaceful conditions with the Palestinian Authority or with Hamas has been obviously proved false by the fact that Israel literally withdrew all IDF forces from the Gaza Strip in 2005. Hamas took control. They spent the last 20 years turning it into a giant terror base. From the Israeli perspective, my assumption is that what they are figuring is degrade Hamas's military capacity such that they cannot be an offensive threat to the state of Israel, and then try to enact some sort of military control of the area sufficient to prevent any future threat from arising from that area. I'm sure that Israel would love to hand the area over to Egypt. Egypt says no. Egypt doesn't want any part of it.
Now here is the evidence-based reading. America is not simply controlled by Israel. That is too simplistic. The United States still has its own interests: military bases, regional dominance, arms sales, energy routes, counter-terrorism, and rivalry with Iran. But Israel has become deeply embedded inside America's foreign policy architecture. That means politicians often treat support for Israel not as one policy option among many, but as a loyalty test. And once a policy becomes a loyalty test, democratic debate starts to shrink. The left-wing reading is straightforward. The left sees unconditional support for Israel as proof that human rights are applied selectively. Ukraine gets one moral standard. Gaza gets another. International law matters when enemies violate it, but becomes complicated when allies are accused. That criticism has real force, but the left also has a blind spot. It can sometimes minimize Israel's genuine security threats or speak as if every Israeli concern is invented propaganda. That is not serious analysis. The right-wing reading is different. The right sees Israel as a strategic ally, a frontline state against Islamist militancy and Iranian influence, and one of the few reliable U.S. partners in the region. That argument also has weight, but the right has its own blind spot. It often claims to believe in America first, then supports open-ended commitments that could drag America into someone else's war. That is not America first. That is alliance management without a price limit. Now watch the defense most politicians usually give. The strongest defense of U.S. policy is this: America supports Israel because Israel serves American interests: intelligence sharing, military cooperation, regional deterrence, technology, a democratic ally in a hostile neighborhood. That is the best version of the argument, and it should be taken seriously. But here is the problem. If this alliance is so clearly in America's interest, why is debate around it so aggressively policed? Why are politicians terrified of donor backlash? Why do presidential candidates compete to prove loyalty before they prove strategy? Why does Congress so often avoid taking responsibility for war powers, while presidents expand military action abroad? That is where the system looks broken, not because one foreign country controls everything, but because America's foreign policy process has become too insulated from democratic accountability. The president acts, Congress complains after the fact. Lobby groups pressure the middle. Media outlets frame dissent as either courage or betrayal, depending on the tribe. And voters are left watching billions move overseas while being told there is no money for problems at home. That is politically explosive. And eventually people stop trusting the entire foreign policy establishment. So, is America still in control of its foreign policy? Technically, yes, but politically, the answer is more worrying. America still has the power. America still has the money. America still has the military. But control is not just about having power. Control means being able to say no. No to allies, no to donors, no to lobbyists, no to presidents who want escalation without consent, no to media narratives that turn every question into treason. And right now, America struggles to say no. That does not mean Israel controls America. It means Washington has built a foreign policy culture where some alliances become untouchable, some wars become inevitable, and some questions become career-ending. That is not healthy democracy. That is managed consent. The evidence-based conclusion is this: America is not powerless. But its foreign policy is increasingly constrained by political fear, donor influence, strategic habit, and a Congress that often refuses to do its constitutional job until the damage is already done. The real test is simple. Can American leaders put American interests, democratic debate, and human life above lobby pressure and political theater? Because if they cannot, then the problem is bigger than Israel. The problem is Washington itself. So here is the question. Do you think America still controls its foreign policy? Or has the system become too captured to admit who really benefits?
If you value evidence over tribalism, subscribe to Hard-Hitting News 365. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next one.